What if peace building isn't something reserved for diplomats, politicians, or people with big platforms? In this episode, I sit down with Chip Hauss, a lifelong peace builder, to talk about why real change doesn't start in Washington, it starts at home. This is a conversation about agency, courage, and the quiet power of choosing curiosity over certainty. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate The Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate The Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. This is one of those conversations that reminds me why I still believe we can do better, and why that work starts closer to home than most of us realize. Today I'm joined by Chip Hauss, author, professor, peacebuilder, and senior fellow for innovation at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and a fellow advisor with me at the Pro-Human Foundation. Chip has spent decades working in conflict resolution, political polarization, and peace building, not as an abstract theory, but as a lived, practical discipline. And what struck me most in this conversation is how deeply aligned his work is with what we talk about here on Derate the Hate: root cause problem solving, paradigm shifts, courageous citizenship, and of course, reclaiming our personal agency. We talk about the myths that keep us stuck, the idea that nothing can change, or that people like us can do nothing about it. We talk about why local action matters more than we think, why conversation across difference can actually be joyful, and why peace isn't a distant goal, it's something that we all must practice. This episode isn't about fixing everything overnight. It's about remembering that change ripples outward when we start where we are, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and of course our communities. Let's get into it with my friend, Chip Hauss. Here we go. Chip Hauss, thank you for joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast, man. It's great to see you today.
Good to be here.
Very glad to see one of my fellow Pro-Human Foundation advisors. I'm always eager to have these conversations, Chip. The Pro-Human Foundation is something I'm very passionate about. And a while back when I was asked to be an advisor on the board of advisors for the Pro-Human Foundation, and got to start meeting my fellow advisors, each time is a treat for me, and just grateful that you're here today. First of all, I just want to start off with a little bit of your backstory, Chip, because I've seen you described as a veteran peace builder, a veteran conflict resolution specialist, a person that's been doing this for a while, and I'm always interested to find out how my guests got into this space, this bridge building space, conflict resolution, things like that. So just give me a quick rundown, Chip, on on how this thing got started for you and how it's become your passion and what you've been doing for so long.
I think rather than give you my full biography, which can take forever because I'm old, I can start with the fact that I'm a product of the Vietnam and civil rights era and ended up going to college and, as I jokingly put it, majored in the war in Vietnam. But since you mentioned the Pro-Human Foundation, let me start the pick up the story there. At my wife's first husband's 70th birthday party a decade ago, this black guy, Daryl Davis, was there because he and Gretchen's ex-husband are in the same swing dancing circuit. And Ed introduced me to Daryl as someone who does civil rights stuff, and I didn't pay much attention. And then during the pandemic, Daryl showed up at a meeting of a group of Rotarians in Portland, Oregon, who were working on racial healing. And I all of a sudden realized that's the same guy. And again, it was really interesting. I read some of Daryl's stuff, but I hadn't had any real contact. I had no contact with him until about a year ago. I was at an event at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, which is a libertarian-leaning think tank. And I've been asked by one of my former students, who is a libertarian, if I would be willing to go. And Daryl was one of the keynote speakers. And so he and I talked before the event and mostly about my wife's ex-husband. And we clicked. And I asked him a question, basically, okay, Daryl, I'm a white guy. I don't play the piano very well. I can't do what you did in bringing a couple hundred people out of the Klan. What can I do? And then the pro-human folks who were there realized I was potentially interesting. First of all, as a career liberal at the Mercatus Center, what made me an anomaly. Uh-huh. And then that got me thinking, and then I'll just do one last bit and stop here. And that is that I was already working on this book, Peacebuilding Starts at Home, which came out in November. And I realized that if we're really going to make this happen, we have to do what I'm pretty good at, which is having discussions with people I disagree with and enjoy having them. But we really have to intentionally reach out to the people we disagree with and do it in a way that actually addresses the underlying problems, like racism or economic inequality.
Yeah.
So I spared you the very long, boring life history.
Oh, I can almost guarantee it's not boring at all, but we can save some of those other stories for another time, Chip. But one of the things that really struck me and stood out to me when I started, kind of looking at the work that you've done and things like that are some things that are very, very similar for me. Now, number one, not necessarily a similarity you and I have, but you brought up the fact that you're a liberal at the Mercatus Center and ironically, I'm a conservative in the bridging space, which makes me kind of an anomaly. Unfortunately, there's just not enough of us in the bridging space. But one of the things that you and I, or a couple of things that you and I really have in common that I think I would really like to talk about in our conversation today is the idea of root cause problem solving, which I know you talk about, and paradigm shifts. There's paradigm shifts are something that I talk about quite often on the Derate The Hate podcast and in speaking engagements and things that I do, and root cause problem solving. As somebody who spent a lot of my career in operations and things like that, root cause problem solving has always been a big thing for me, right? I go for the root cause rather than kind of addressing the symptoms of the problem, go to the root cause of the problem, and then start to look for downstream ramifications from there. I don't think it happens enough today, especially in government and the way that we do things. I want to hear more about how you think. Well, first, as somebody who talks about the root cause problem solving and trying to address some of these problems at home, Chip, talk to me about some of the myths that people have come to you with in regards to what we are encountering today with the toxic polarity and some of the problems that we're seeing in society today, and people who are just trying to address the symptoms as opposed to the root causes.
Let me just give you two myths. I could probably give you 30, but the and they build off of each other. The first myth is that there are no solutions out there to consider, and the second is that people like you and me can't do anything about them. So let me take each of them. There is no shortage of good ideas out there, most of which require thinking about problems on a different level, thinking about our problems as problems that we share, not problems that pit left versus right. But in today's interdependent world, we can't solve climate change. We can't solve economic inequality. We can't solve the sense that people feel disempowered because they're on their screens all the time, simply as simple cell side issues. We've got to address them together, and our system just isn't set up for that very well. The second myth, that we can't do anything about it, is half true. Like many myths, it is true that I can't change what the U.S. government does. Certainly in the previous administrations, not so much this one, but certainly under or even earlier Republican administrations, I knew plenty of people in the State Department. I could call them, they take my call, but realistically, I couldn't convince them to do anything. Where I do have an impact, and you have an impact, and your listeners have an impact is, it's a jargon term, but it's in the microcosm of your daily life.
That's right.
And what you do with your family, with your neighbors, you can begin to move the cliched needle there. And this is where I think what we have to say, and I think Braver Angels has to say, comes into play too. And that is, once I begin to have an impact in that little sphere, I can then see that ripple out. I become someone who affects other people, which I hope we'll get to at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. When we start to think about our sphere of influence, right? I think you make some really good points there, Chip, in that, when you were saying that, it made me think of the one thing you said, it's half true that we can't do anything. And when I think of that, the first phrase that comes to mind for me is that if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And unfortunately, right? I mean, it sounds cliche, but unfortunately, a lot of people today feel that they just feel that they've lost their agency. They feel disempowered to do the things that need to be done. But you're exactly right when you say, there's things that we can do right at home, and that's why I love the title of your book, Peacebuilding Starts at Home, how we can make things happen. This idea that we as a society have, and this I think goes to one of those paradigm shifts that I was talking about, is we have turned everything into like this federal issue, right? But not everything is a federal issue. One of the big things that we're very proud of at Braver Angels right now is our citizen-led solutions program that we've just started. Democracy is citizen-led. There are a lot of things that we can do at home if we start working on those common cause problems that we actually have today. We don't need to make everything a red or a blue issue. There are a lot of common cause issues right close to home that we can start working on. And whether you have a very small circle of influence or you have a large circle of influence, at some point your circle of influence overlaps with somebody else's circle of influence. And I'll go to another term that some people consider cliche, but I think Gandhi said it best when he said, be the change that you want to see in the world, right? When you start acting as if you have agency, you can do something, that kind of thing is contagious. And even if you have a small circle of influence, Chip, it's going to overlap with somebody else's, and you might be the inspiration that that person needs.
So let me take off on that point with two very, 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 very local examples that I'm involved in. The first is community-wide. We live in the city of Falls Church, Virginia, which has about 18,000 people. It's going to grow by about 50% in this decade. And the local leaders are planning that growth very effectively, but they've also helped create something called Falls Church Forward, which is a local network. You may know Vinay Orakondi of Better Together America. Vinay and his team are setting up these local civic hubs around the country, and Falls Church Forward is exactly what Vinay is trying to do, except that they didn't know about each other until recently. So they're locally led. In this case, what's it going to be like to build affordable housing in an affluent suburb of Washington that is 2 miles square, where there isn't room to build new individual homes, where you can build new apartments, and then that raises traffic issues. And so in all of Falls Church, we're trying to do this. The other example is actually even closer to home, and that is my wife and I moved into the city of Falls Church from 8 blocks away over the summer into a new condo. It was time for us to downsize. And our building has 120 odd units, and it is in the process of selling. So the developer still controls the board, because less than 2/3 of the units have been sold. And we've had some conflict with the management, which by the time this airs will probably have been resolved. But what's happened is that my wife and I, have spent a lot of time working with the building manager, working with the board, not wanting the problems to go away, but to set a tone where these are problems that we're going to tackle together. And they're trivial.
Okay.
Snow removal, which where you are is a big deal. Here we just can't do it. And so they've really had to work on getting rid of 2 inches of snow, which for you is nothing.
For nothing, no.
But what we've seen is that the building manager, who came in under very difficult circumstances, has decided she really likes working with Gretchen and me, because we know that we have a problem, and we focus on what we're for, not what we're against. And again, it ripples out beyond who we are. And, we have some skills that we've learned over the years from Braver Angels and Living Room Conversations and all those other groups. But it's more just the way we carry ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing. And like you said, it carries out. It's contagious. When people start to see tangible results from good action, as opposed to the ugliness of either inaction or just hostility, that stuff becomes contagious. I just, when I think about the whole concept of citizen-led solutions to common cause problems close to home, and really, it doesn't have to be, like I said, the whole idea of making everything a federal issue, or thinking that action has to be some big, bold move. It's just not true. This is a perfect example, Chip, of working with your, whether it be the condo association, or your homeowners association, or in your community, how you do things, especially when you do them right. I mean, well, how you do things, whether you do them right or do them wrong, they can both be contagious. It's kind of like an episode I did a long time ago. I said, smiles and bad moods are contagious. Choose wisely, right? The same thing is for action. It doesn't need to be big, bold action. But if you start to show people that action can be done in the right way, it carries out. That sphere of influence. And that's the other thing, is it's exponential. Because what was a small sphere of influence can become a bigger and a bigger and a bigger sphere of influence, and bigger and better things start to happen out of one small, a small pebble in a pond. I speak in a lot of cliches. I think I'm doing more today than normal. But you know what? A small pebble in a pond maybe starts as a small ripple, but by the time it gets to the other end, it can be a big wave.
Let me amplify that with two other stories. One is we hired a publicist for the book and the Peacebuilding Starts at Home movement, and the company is called Ripple Impact. And what Selena Villani, the woman who put the company together, is all about is having starting with something and let it ripple out. And the book she wrote that ultimately led to the company is called Innovation Starts with I.
Yeah.
And, it really takes it back to who you are as a person. The other thing that takes off from what you just said is that we are in the process of launching a campaign that is based on exponential growth. We're going to start early in this year with about 100 people I featured in the book, people we know otherwise, like Lori of ProHumans, both in the book and someone we know. And we're going to ask those people to have 10 conversations with people they know who do not think of themselves as peace builders, and on whatever topics they care about, begin to get people to see that we need a paradigm shift, or we'll find some more publicly acceptable term, but we need profound change. We need it to come from the inside out, and so on. And by the summer, give or take, we'll have about 1,000 people. And if those 1,000 go out and get 10 more in the next 6 months, by the end of the year, we'll be at 10,000. And, if you remember your high school algebra, that number can get to millions.
Yeah.
Quite quickly.
Yes,
it doesn't help you solve the problem of the person, the impatient person who says, I want it to be solved tomorrow, as I often describe myself. But it does allow you to take the time to build a movement that can really work. Can I guarantee that we'll reach exactly that number of 20, 30 million people by the end of the decade? No, but we can make progress. And again, it's that logic of rippling out and starting with people where they are and building from where they are. And that has to be done in this country with people who are liberals and conservatives.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely can't be a one-sided thing. I mean, our political spectrum has certainly become fairly wonky in recent years, and we have, kind of extreme wings on either end, and then there's a whole bunch of people in the middle. Some people call them the silent majority. My friend Manu Meal from Bridge USA calls them the hopeful majority. My friend Francis Collins calls them the exhausted middle. I mean, there's a lot of things going on there. But no matter where you fall on that spectrum, Chip, and I truly believe this, I have the hope, I have the optimism that everybody on that spectrum, if given the right tools, if presented with the right mindset, if committed to that paradigm shift, can become part of the solution. I think about this, and this is one of the big things at Braver Angels that we're talking a lot about right now, Chip, is the concept of courageous citizenship, and how this is not going to be, this bridge building thing, this reclaiming our civic life starts with our personal agency. It's not going to be a top-down thing, right? We as individuals have to choose to take the power back, act, not react. start as an individual, start close to home, then branch out, bring that into our community, and then eventually branch out and bring that into our larger civic life, our larger national kind of unity life, and then it can even be taken further than that. If we want to make a bigger impact on the world. I think your math example, or to go back to high school algebra, the exponential way that these things work, it can't be overstated. But I think it's right. I think it takes that hope and optimism, right? That feeling of I do have the power to affect change. I can pull as long as I pull myself together and not try to overthink it or overbuild it. It's got to be one bite at a time, just like that, the whole eating an elephant analogy, one bite at a time. If we focus on anything too large instead of right there, what's in front of our face, we become overwhelmed. Talk about that overwhelmed feeling and how that can actually affect people's sense of agency or their sense of hope and optimism.
That's hard for me to talk about because I almost never feel overwhelmed by political divides. I feel overwhelmed by the fact that there are only 24 hours in a day. And when I asked Santa for an extra 4 hours, he turned me down because I'm Jewish. So when I get overwhelmed, and then I'll take it back to people who feel politically overwhelmed. When I get overwhelmed, I do the kinds of things I've learned from my therapist, which is to take a deep breath, count to a few numbers. If you watch PBS promotional fundraising ads, Daniel Tiger says, take a deep breath and count to 4, which I've seen enough that I can do it by heart. But do something like that and try to reframe the situation that you're in. What's the worst case scenario that could happen? What are the odds that really is going to happen? And what can I do about to make things better? So I've been personally quite lucky on political bridge building. I'll just give you one example. My best friend from nursery school, I was a conscientious objector during Vietnam. Dick was told by his uncle, who granted me my conscientious objector status, that he had to go into the military. So Dick spent 35 years in the Navy and ended up as a senior military planner on the Secretary of Defense's staff. And we reconnected at our 35th high school reunion. Then I had a book talk 2 days after 9/11. He and I ended up doing the Q&A together. And you couldn't tell who was the career peacenik and who was the career peacebuilder military guy. And we worked together for the next 25 years until he died. But we found ways to really enjoy hanging out, me in the Pentagon, and he ended up on the Alliance for Peacebuilding board. And so when you feel overwhelmed, as I was when I walked into the Pentagon for the first time, trust me, it was not what I ever expected to do, but I looked upon it as what a cool thing to be able to do. And discovered that the generals and colonels I met that day were just normal human beings.
All human beings
who had to go to the bathroom the same way that I did, and some of them drove hybrids, just like is 15 years ago, but when that was a rare thing. And so I have come to actually not enjoy being overwhelmed, but I really like talking to people I disagree with.
Yes.
I enjoy it. It is actually fun.
Yeah. And what has been your, and I always like to, when I hear people say that, because you're not the only one who actually loves to engage in dialogue with people that you disagree with. But what are just a couple of things, as we get close to the end of our time, a couple of the biggest things that stand out to you as why that is something that you really love to do? What is the first thing that that always, and this kind of almost goes back to the myth thing, but people are like, oh, we simply can't coexist with these people, or I can't have a conversation with that person. But what is one of those things, Chip, that stands out to you as just why what's the why that you like those conversations?
The biggest why for me is that I don't know why someone I know and like believes something I find absolutely preposterous. And I mean, this is a real story, and I don't know why I've been this way. So my first day teaching at Colby College, I walked out of my first class. A student tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Weren't you my camp counselor when I was 10?" And it turned out I had been. And
Wow.
he was a great camper. A decade later, he's a 21-year-old college junior or senior, I've forgotten which he was. And all the signs were that he was a Republican. And I certainly was not. And it turns out Mark wasn't a Republican, but I realized that I had to work with someone who was going to be different from me, who was very preppy. This was in the late 70s. I assumed he was getting ready to vote for Reagan. It turns out he didn't. But you used the word mindset before. It shifted my mindset. All of a sudden, I'm not someone who's just professing to my students. I'm in a partnership with him, just as I had been when he was a 10-year-old and I had to make him make his bunk every morning. I also was there to help him grow, and that was going to be the same as his college professor. And we still talk 50 years later. And so I don't know. I really can't answer what it is that makes this fun for me. But when I spend time, I spent a lot of time working with evangelical peace builders. And I'm not religiously Jewish, but I'm also not a Christian. I'm not sure what I am religiously. But, when I go to meetings, and I was at an evangelical meeting right after the weekend after the first Trump election. And they were quite a divided crowd. Some of them were looking for jobs. Some of them were saying, oh my God, what has happened here? And when they hit an impasse, they prayed. And that was not anything I was used to. They asked me if I was comfortable with it. I was the only Jew in the room. And I said, of course. And so I don't know. I mean, I can't answer where that curiosity mindset comes from. It certainly didn't come from my family or my school. I went, as a kid, I went to a bad public school system. Then I went to the most liberal arts college in the country. So I don't know where that tolerance and curiosity come from.
Yeah.
I wish I could bottle it and sell it.
I wish you could too. And one of the things for me, and I'll just throw this in there, and you can tell me what you think of it. A lot of times, I think curiosity is its own reward. I mean, for me, it is because, like, I think about my friend Monica Guzman in her book. I never thought of it that way, and the way that she talks about curiosity and how you get excited to find out things that you didn't know, or clear up misperceptions and misconceptions. To me, I think a lot of times curiosity can become its own reward, because without curiosity, I think of the opposite of curiosity, and that's certainty. And I have found that now the less certain I am about things and the more curious I am about things, the more I can learn. And the more I learn, every day that I learn something new, Chip, is a beautiful day. That's why I love doing this. That's why I love having these conversations and encountering people that I disagree with, because sometimes I just things that I may have been certain about before, or think a certain way about, but then I encounter somebody who thinks about it in an entirely different way. That becomes the reward for me, is just learning something new. Even if I disagree with them and continue to disagree with them, common ground is not always where I'm going in these conversations, but at least I understand that person better, and that is a huge reward for me. Chip, I know we're getting real close. Well, we're actually a little beyond our time, but that's fine. I just want to real quick have you tell the DTH listeners a couple of the high points, things that they can find in your book. Peace Building Starts at Home, because I definitely want them to check that out, and then we'll make sure that information for that book is in the show notes. But Peace Building Starts at Home. Talk to me quick about some of the high points that they're going to find in that book.
Let me just give you two. The first is the original title, which was going to be Peace is a Verb, not a noun, but it is something it's not this distant goal we're never going to reach. It is something you can do, you can build. And our executive director, Liz Hume, said, that's a great T-shirt. I was wearing one that day, but it's a terrible idea to build a movement around. So we switched it to Peace Building Starts at Home. But peace is a verb is still there. The second is the way I start the book. I title the first chapter, Start Where You Are. And the discussion I'm having with you is very different from the discussion that I would have with Liz Hume, our executive director, who has been doing peace building for 30 years, or very different from what I would have with my sister, who is as apolitical as I'm political, spends her life camping in 6 months a year. They camp. You used to be in a teardrop trailer, which I assume you know what a teardrop trailer is.
Oh yeah.
But as they've gotten older, they now travel in a van, converted van, and they go to folk music concerts. The discussion I'm going to have with Leslie is very different from the one that I have with Liz Hume. And so start where you are. And I am, because this is my fetish, this is my life, be sure to put my contact information in the show notes as well, because I would love to talk to all of your listeners, your audience.
Beautiful. Yeah, we'll definitely make sure that that your contact information, the way that people can reach out to you, the peacebuildingstartsathome.us, that website, people can find out more about you, find out more about the book. And yeah, what a great conversation, Chip. And I so appreciate the work that you're doing, and proud to serve on the board of advisors there at the Pro Human Foundation with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate The Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.